Welcome back, 412 Youth Middle Schoolers. We're so glad to have you back for another Wednesday night lesson. As always, we're going to start with our base scripture, which is 1 Timothy 4:12, and this is out of the New King James Version. Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, in purity. So the last few weeks we've been talking about integrity. So tonight we're going to talk about David and the armor of God. So when David messed up, he repented and reset his focus back on God. He didn't hang his head in shame and hide in a closet somewhere. He righted the wrong to the best of his ability, repented, and moved forward. So David's the king of Israel. So as a boy, he was a shepherd, protecting his father's sheep. He looked out for them and kept them safe, even killing wild animals by himself for the flock. As a teenager, he defended his God and his country by confronting and killing the Philistine giant Goliath. He is described in the Word as a man after God's own heart. David lived a life of integrity, but not always. As we read the accounts of David's life in the books of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, we learn about his huge accomplishments and victories. David was a great king and leader, but he wasn't perfect. He made mistakes like we all do, sometimes allowing his flesh to have control over his actions.
Yes, so we're going to read tonight in 1 Samuel chapter 30. What we're going to go over is pretty much in that whole chapter. And it tells us about David seeking God and doing the right thing. So David and his army had been away to go into battle with some other armies that they had kind of aligned with. And but they wound up not going into the battle. So they come home. And in the first verse of chapter 30, it reads, 3 days later, when David and his men arrived home at their town of Ziklag, they found that the Amalekites, which was one of their enemies that they had been fighting, the Amalekites had made a raid into the Negev and Ziklag. They had crushed Ziklag and burned it to the ground. They carried off the women and children and everyone else, but without killing anyone. So they didn't find any evidence that anyone had been killed or anything, but everyone was missing. Everyone was gone. They had come back to find their home completely destroyed, and all of their families were kidnapped, including David's. It wasn't just everybody else's family, his wives were taken too. So everything that they had was taken from them. And in verse 3 it continues, when David and his men saw the ruins and realized what had happened to their families, they wept until they could weep no more. This wasn't just something that was part of normal battle. This wasn't something that they were used to experiencing. They were used to going into battle, doing their jobs as soldiers, and then coming home to their families and to their town. Like we normally go home to our families every day. And then all of a sudden when they come home and they expect to see their children, they expect to see their wives and their servants and tend to their sheep and their cattle and everything else that they had, they come home and all of that's gone. They have nothing left. And their homes are burned to the ground. They have nothing. So now David is in great danger because all his men were very bitter about losing their sons and their daughters, and they began to talk of stoning him. But David found strength in the Lord his God. So not only was David distraught about losing his family and the families of all his friends and companions, now his friends and companions were starting to turn on him. They were so upset, and they thought they needed somebody to blame for it, and David was the one. David was their king and their leader. And then when they had went off to battle, he didn't leave anybody behind to take care of their home. All the men had went with him, and nobody was home but the women and children. So David could have then given into that pressure from all of his army. His whole army was like not very happy with him. And he could have said, you're right. I'm not fit to lead you all, and then given up. Or he could have gotten angry at his men for blaming him. The anger situation could have just built on one another, and he could have then started fighting them. But there are many things that he could have done, or that we would even do if we got into our flesh in that situation. But the word says that David found strength in the Lord his God. David didn't look to his flesh for the solution to the problem. That would have gotten him stoned. It would have gotten him killed. If he had then got angry and started yelling at his troops, or if he started executing people who were speaking against him or whatever, that would have gotten him killed. His army would have completely mutinied, and they would have killed him. But he didn't. He set all those pressures aside. He set aside the shame of knowing that he made a mistake and he didn't make the right call. He set aside the blame that everybody was putting on him for doing that, and he set aside the mourning, the despair of losing his family. He set all of that aside, and he talked to God.
Right. And so in verse 7, we're going to pick up, it says, "Then he said to Abiathar the priest, 'Bring me the ephod,'" or ephod. Mm-hmm. So what is that? It sounds like a funny word. But it actually is part of the garments that the priest wore. Before Jesus, most people didn't simply talk with God about his will, whether out of fear they weren't holy enough, or would incur his wrath, or because God typically only spoke through his prophets. So when they wanted to know God's will, they consulted a priest or a prophet, who would then speak to God on their behalf. Those who spoke to God would use holy items such as the ephod to help them communicate with the Lord.
So when he called for the ephod, when he said, "Bring me the ephod," David not only was a king, but he talked to God. So he was a priest to his people too. And he was familiar with the garments, with the items that they used. So it was a garment that you put on, and it had like a breastplate on it with different stones that represented the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It represented the 12 tribes of Judah, and that was one of the things that helped them communicate with God. And so when he said, "Bring me that," he put it on himself. He put it over his body. And I want to draw attention to that, and then us also go to Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 14, where it says, "Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness." So a breastplate, we know, like in armor, we think of medieval knights and soldiers with the helmets and the shoulders and the breastplate and the sword and the whole bit. A breastplate is like a shield for your chest. It guards and it protects your torso from enemy attacks. So the physical armor of a breastplate guards and protects your physical body, your physical heart. And the breastplate of righteousness, which Ephesians talks about, or integrity, because we talked about that too, that integrity and righteousness they go in hand. It guards and protects your spiritual heart, or your spirit man, from attacks from the enemy, from Satan, from the devil. when we're walking in righteousness, when we're living a life of integrity, we have put on that breastplate. We put on that shield that protects us, protects our heart. And we can't be condemned. We can't be convicted because we are right back in right standing with God when we put that on. So that's another thing that David was doing. Not only was he communicating with God through the ephod, he was putting back on that breastplate of righteousness. He was getting back into right standing with God so that he could move forward. He could go and he could be protected against the enemy. So when it continues in verse 7, it says, so Abiathar brought David the ephod. And when David asked the Lord, should I chase after the band of raiders? Will I catch them? So he's asking God what he should do. He's not making up what he should do in his mind, making up his own mind for it. He's asking God what he should do. And the Lord told him, yes, go after them. You will surely recover everything that was taken from you.
Right. So David had gotten his word from the Lord, the instructions he needed to act on. He immediately set out after the Amalekites. When they caught up to him, not only did they get every person and their family back safely, but all the stuff that was taken from them, plus they got all the stuff that Amalekites had. Mm-hmm. So they returned richer than when they had left, and they didn't lose one person, animal, or coin. So verse 18 says, David got back everything that Amalekites had taken, and he rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, small or great, son or daughter, nor anything else that had been taken. David brought everything back. He also recovered all the flocks and herds, and his men drove them ahead of the other livestock. This plunder belongs to David, they said.
And so David, when he was in trouble, he didn't go hide somewhere. He didn't give up. He didn't just think, oh, well, this is it. This is the end. He went to God. That was his first thing. He needed to fix the situation. So he went to God and he asked, do I need to do this? Do I need to chase after this? Do I need to pursue these people who have taken our families? And God said, yes, go after them. You'll get them. He didn't question God. He didn't say, are you sure? He didn't say, I don't know. All these men are really mad at me. If I go out here, they're about to kill me. No, he went out and said, God said, we're going to take it all. We're leaving now. And they did. They immediately went and they got back everything they had lost and more. So what part of our walking in integrity is righting the wrong, not giving up, and being obedient to what God says, and he is going to restore. That he is a God, our God is a God who restores, and he is going to restore anything that has come about for our mistakes. He knows that we're human. He knows that we are not perfect, and he wants us to still get what he has for us.
Right. So that's going to complete and finish up this lesson for tonight. We believe that you're going to get something from this. We know we did. So we love you, and we can't wait to see you again next week.
Bye, guys. Bye. Love you.